Here is the translation of the provided text into natural, clear, and AI-readable English, with sentences structured for clarity and fidelity to the original content, preserving all details and tone without additions or omissions. What happens when a police officer thinks he can humiliate a woman in a courtroom, unaware that she is the Supreme Court Justice? A shaved head, a torn honor, and a system that seemed untouchable. But what he didn't expect was this. The woman he insulted is the one with the power to sentence him. This isn't just a story about a case. It's an earthquake in the American justice system. Hold your emotions tight, because you're about to enter a courtroom where every rule is recounted. What happens when a woman walks into a courtroom and leaves not only with justice, but with a legacy? That morning, the Charleston courthouse operated as usual. The soft echo of shoes on marble floors, staff gliding through security checkpoints, and the steam still rising from coffee cups in the hands of young lawyers. But no one noticed the woman who stepped through the main doors. Her silver hair was neatly braided, her face calm, and she carried a small leather briefcase. She had no entourage, no badge displayed on her coat. She was quiet, but each step was a declaration. No one knew that, just minutes later, this woman would leave the entire courthouse stunned. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she was about to do something no one had dared. Expose a truth hidden for over a decade in the place called the Temple of Justice. And the first person to stop her wasn't a criminal. It was a police officer with a cold smile and a pair of clippers waiting in a windowless room. At the security checkpoint, the air suddenly grew heavy. Deputy Hank Riker, a middle-aged man with suspicious eyes and large hands crossed tightly over his chest, stepped forward to block her. "Where are you going, ma'am?" His voice was as cold as steel. He didn't ask to understand. He asked to obstruct. She presented her federal ID, the badge's gleam reflecting under the ceiling lights like a reminder of her authority. But Riker barely glanced at it before slipping it into his pocket, as if it were scrap paper. "No name tag, no visible badge. I call that suspicious behavior," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Follow me." She hesitated for a moment. "I don't consent to this. You're violating my civil rights. And I call that a reason for further inspection," Riker replied. Without waiting for another word, he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a deserted side hallway. A steel door closed behind them. No more natural light. No more witnesses. Just her and 3 officers.
In the middle of the empty room stood a cold metal chair, a small table with a scanner, and, sitting alone beside it, a pair of hair clippers.
She stood still, but her eyes began to waver. "I don't consent to this kind of search. I demand to leave."
Riker stepped forward, saying nothing, and switched on the clippers. The buzzing sound pierced her chest like a swarm of bees breaking free. "You could be hiding something in that hair," he said, pointing at her carefully braided silver locks. Before she could step back, the other 2 men grabbed her arms. The chair forced her to sit. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She only let out a deep sigh, as if swallowing all her anger inside. The clippers glided over her head for the first time. A strand of silver hair fell to the tiled floor. Then a second. Then a third. And at that moment, something else was shaved away. Not just her hair, but the trust she had once placed in this place. The place called a justice. This translation maintains the dramatic tone, cultural nuances, and emotional weight of the original, while ensuring clarity and natural flow in English. Let me know if you need further assistance or adjustments. The door of the inspection room closed behind her with a chilling clack. Her hair, each silver strand carefully maintained, each memory, each layer of her ancestors' history, now lay scattered on the cold floor. But the coldest thing wasn't the stone tiles or the clippers. It was the silence of those who had witnessed it but said nothing. She stepped out of the room, her head bare, her shoulders trembling slightly, her hand clutching the leather briefcase not to hold documents but to grasp the composure that was being drained from her. The hallway seemed endless. Curious, indifferent, or averted eyes appeared everywhere. No one recognized her. No one greeted her. No one knew that the woman being treated like a nameless, ageless nobody was the one about to sit in the highest chair in the courtroom. But then she reached the door of courtroom 3B. She should have entered through the private back entrance, where the judge's robe hung ready, where ceremonies typically began. But today, she chose to walk in like an ordinary citizen. No crown, no shield, only the truth. She paused, took a deep breath, and pushed open the heavy wooden double doors. The hum of conversation stopped instantly. Every head turned. The first look was confusion, the second was surprise, the third was fear. She didn't look at anyone, she didn't explain, she didn't need to. Each step echoed, thud, 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 like a hammer striking the gate of an ancient era. She walked past the rows of plaintiffs, lawyers, and defendants. Some tried to avoid her gaze, others strained to look closer. And then they realized. She stopped behind the judge's bench. The high chair, which everyone had been awaiting the presiding judge to occupy, stood empty. The black robe lay neatly folded there, as if it knew she would return. And then she put it on. No one assisted her. No one performed the ceremonial duties. No drums or fanfare were needed, just her trembling hands draping a symbol of authority over herself. Then she turned to face the entire courtroom. No one dared to speak, not because of the law, but because that silence was reverence. A man dropped his pen. A police officer, Riker himself, stood pressed against the corner of the wall, his face pale, as if he had just seen a ghost. She didn't look at him immediately. She looked straight ahead. The court is now in session. Those simple words, spoken by the woman who had been humiliated just 20 minutes earlier, turned the entire room upside down. She sat down in the judge's chair, not to work, but to wage war. The black robe draped over her shoulders like an invisible suit of armor. It didn't hide her wounds, it turned those wounds into weapons. No one prompted her. No opening formalities were needed. She tapped the wooden gavel lightly once. The sound reverberated, solitary but explosive, as if it shattered the pretense that had cloaked this place for years. We begin with case number 2371F, United States versus Charleston Police Department, she said, her voice so calm it was chilling. Charges: abuse of power, excessive use of force, and violation of civil rights. The room seemed to freeze, but Celeste didn't. She sat upright, pen in hand, taking notes, listening to the testimony of the first witness, a frail veteran who had been pushed down during a peaceful protest. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions. She simply, quietly, prepared. From the corner of her eye, she saw Riker, the deputy who had shaved her head, slowly backing toward the courtroom's rear door. His eyes darted around, his hands trembled slightly, and his lips were pressed tight, as if he might be sick. He knew. He could feel it. His time was coming. Then, after the second witness's testimony, Celeste set her pen down. The court will take a recess. The room fell silent, as if all the air had been sucked out. Lawyers rose from their seats, reporters whispered, but Celeste stayed put, unmoving. When only a few remained, her clerk, 2 officers, and Riker, she looked up. Deputy Riker. Her voice was sharp, like a blade. Riker froze. 1 second. 2. Then he turned. Stepped to the center of the room. Give your testimony. Ma'am, I don't... Step forward. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a gleaming razor. Riker stumbled forward, swaying like a drunk. State your full name, position, and years of service. Hank Riker, 35 years old. I'm a judicial officer, 14 years of service. Celeste nodded slowly. And in those 14 years, how many black women have you shaved bald in the inspection room? No one moved. Sweat dripped from Riker's forehead. I don't remember. You don't remember? She tilted her head. Or you don't want to remember? Then she pulled a thick stack of files from under the table and slammed it down with a thud. 12 formal complaints, all dismissed for lack of evidence. But the evidence is here. on my head. It's real. She stood. And here's another truth. You don't know who I am. You thought I was nobody. She walked straight toward Riker, stopping inches from him. And because of that, you will pay. She turned to the two officers by the door. Arrest Deputy Riker. Solitary holding. Pending criminal investigation. The handcuffs clicked shut. Not loud. But the room seemed to shake. Riker shouted, "You don't have the authority. I'm the law." Celeste's reply was so cold it chilled the entire room. "No, I am the law." Cecil. Riker was led away in cuffs, but the shockwaves lingered. No one said it aloud, but in every glance, every quick look, a single question hung in the air. Who's next? When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was no longer one of formal tradition. It was heavy, like a storm about to break. The next witness was called, a middle-aged man, his face etched with time and eyes deep as if they'd seen too much no one would believe. "Please state your name and why you're here today," the clerk said. "Howard Briggs," he said. "I'm a warehouse worker, and I'm here because of my son, Malcolm." The room went still. A 17-year-old boy, restrained by police at a peaceful protest, a knee on his neck. They said he was resisting, but he didn't even get a chance to speak before he stopped breathing. Celeste's hand tightened slightly. Mr. Briggs went on. "We begged them to call an ambulance. They said, 'He's faking it.' He wasn't faking. He nearly died." He looked up at Celeste, his voice lowering. "He's still alive, but now he can't even speak clearly. A whole year. And not one person has been held accountable." The courtroom felt like it was choking. Some turned away, others bowed their heads. Celeste looked at him, not with the weight of authority, but with deep human empathy. "You've done what no father should ever have to do. Watch your child suffocate on a public street," she said slowly. "I hear every word you've said. This time, you're not speaking into a void. You're speaking into the legal record, and it will not disappear." As Mr. Briggs stepped down from the witness stand, his gaze swept over the officers at the defense table. They looked down, no longer smug, no longer exchanging those "we'll get away again" nods. This time, they knew someone was keeping score. The next witness was someone no one expected to speak. Denise Talley, a retired court clerk. Neat, quiet for years. But today, she wasn't just the note-taker. She stepped to the stand. Her voice was low, clear, and steady. "I managed the filing of internal complaints for 8 years, and I can confirm there were at least 12 complaints against Deputy Riker for abusive conduct. Some were recorded and then lost. Some were stamped resolved without ever being addressed. Some were never even opened." Celeste asked softly, "Who gave those orders?" Denise looked down. Then she looked up, straight ahead. "Judge Terence Mahoney, your predecessor, the man who mentored me through my early years." The room went deathly silent. That name wasn't unfamiliar. He was praised for upholding the court's reputation. He commended Celeste when she was appointed, and now he was the one who'd built the wall that kept justice out. Celeste said nothing, but her hand gripped the pen tighter. The blood drained from her knuckles. She knew this fight wasn't just against individuals anymore. It was against a system rotten to its core. Right after Denise Talley's testimony, the courtroom's atmosphere shifted, not from emotion, but from the fear of a single word. Truth. At the defense table, the lawyers stirred. A man stood, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, his pinstriped suit screaming money. His voice was smooth, tactical. "Your Honor," he said, "we request a recess to file a motion to recuse the judge. With all due respect, we believe Judge Monroe is no longer impartial." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room like a wave. Celeste didn't react. She simply rose, stepped down from the bench, and walked to the center of the room, where witnesses testify. But today she stood there to answer, not with the law, but with the truth. She looked straight at the lawyer, then at the entire room. "You say I'm not impartial because I'm a victim of this very system." Her voice wasn't loud, but each word landed like a nail driven into wood. Because I was stripped of my dignity, insulted, humiliated, right here in the building where I swore to uphold justice? And you think that makes me unfit to sit here? He tried to stay composed. I only want to ensure fairness. Celeste cut him off. Her eyes blazed. You want to talk about fairness? Let's talk about the 12 complaints buried, about a 17-year-old boy who can't speak since an officer knelt on his neck. About my hair, it was shaved strand by strand as if I weren't human, just because I walked in without a judge's robe. She looked into the crowd. Some turned away, and some had tears in their eyes. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because justice has been silent for too long. And if you think justice can't be served by someone who's been trampled on, then maybe you've never understood what justice is. The lawyer went silent. His mouth opened, but no rebuttal came. He returned to his seat without being told. Celeste walked back to her bench, sat down, picked up her gavel and struck it once, calm as if nothing had happened. The motion is denied. The trial continues, and we will see this through to the end. Thus, when the court recessed, people didn't step outside to breathe. They stepped out to grapple with the fact that everything had just changed. Outside, the news spread like wildfire. A federal judge had just exposed the system in open court. Inside, Celeste Munro walked to her chambers, not to rest, but to prepare for something bigger than all of this, turning her pain into law. On her desk sat a charcoal grey folder, untitled, unadorned, with only a faint line of text. Munro Mandate. Proposed reform of federal judicial security processes. She opened it, flipping through pages written during sleepless nights. Mandatory racial bias. Training for all court security personnel. Regular psychological evaluations and independent oversight for all judicial officers. An independent complaint commission with full access to records that could never again disappear. She knew these weren't just laws, they were a shield for those who'd never had the chance to walk through a courthouse with trust. When the trial resumed, Celeste didn't read the proposal. She didn't need to persuade. She presented it with the truth. She stood, holding the folder before the entire courtroom. I'm not proposing this as a victim. I'm proposing it as a survivor. And I refuse to let my survival be just another statistic. The Munro Mandate, she paused, letting the name hang in the air for a moment, will be submitted to the Federal Appeals Court, and if necessary, I will take it to Congress. Because if the system doesn't change after what we've witnessed today, we're no longer a judiciary. We're just a stage propped up to maintain silence. Some nodded. A few hands clenched. But at the back of the room, an elderly black woman in a grey knit cap placed a hand on her chest and whispered, "Thank you." Celeste didn't respond, but her eyes softened like a silent vow. And then she said, "Because the next person who walks into this room could be your daughter or you. And I won't allow what happened to me to happen again." That morning, it rained. Not the light, fleeting drizzle of early fall, but a heavy downpour, as if trying to wash away something etched too deep for too long. The courtroom doors opened one last time for this trial, not with fanfare or murmurs, but with a silence that felt like quiet reverence. Everyone took their seats. Only one person was escorted in, hands bound by number 8 cuffs, eyes sunken and dark. Hank Riker. No badge, no uniform that once let him stride through these halls with his head high. Now he was the defendant. The man was watched by a nation. The one who'd faced the justice he'd once choked out. Celeste was already seated. She said nothing. She didn't look at him like an enemy. She looked at him like the final product of a system no one dared touch. Until today. She opened the file. Hank Riker. As a federal judge in the Charleston district, I find you guilty of abuse of power, 6 years in prison, violation of civil rights, 5 years, obstruction of a federal investigation, 1 year, total, 12 years in federal prison, no parole. Riker's head hung low, no protest, no words. Maybe he knew there was no way out. But Celeste wasn't done. She spoke slower, each word carved deep. That's the legal sentence. Now here's the moral one. You used your power to decide who deserved respect and who deserved humiliation. You thought your badge was a shield against justice. But you forgot. The law wasn't created to protect power. The law was created to protect people from men like you. She turned to the security officers. Escort the defendant out. As Riker was led away, no one laughed, no one gloated. They just watched. This wasn't a moment for celebration. It was a moment to witness. Celeste followed him with her eyes, then tapped her gavel one final time. Court is adjourned. The courtroom emptied, but outside the crowd stayed. They didn't rush to leave. They weren't waiting for the verdict. They were waiting to witness history. The courtroom doors opened, and Celeste stepped out. No judge's robe, no covering on her head. Her bare scalp, with faint scratches still visible, was no longer a mark of shame. It was a symbol of survival. No choir sang her praises, no flowers, no official cameras, just the eyes of those who'd once stayed silent. Now. They nodded. An elderly woman, frail and trembling, holding a battered umbrella bent by the rain, approached and placed a calloused hand on Celeste's arm. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for those who gave up long ago. Celeste didn't reply. She just clasped the woman's hand tightly. A teenage girl stepped forward from behind the woman, pulling off her hoodie. Her unevenly shaved head came into view, a silent but powerful sign that she'd chosen to stand with the truth. Celeste looked at her, nodded. No words were exchanged, just an acknowledgement that the next generation was watching. And ready. That night, Celeste sat alone in her office. The rain still fell outside, but the lamp's glow filled the room with warmth. On her desk were faxes from other federal districts, requesting a copy of the Monroe Mandate. Interested in racial bias training. We want to start over, with the truth. She read each line, not with triumph, but with gratitude. Not because they praised her, but because they listened. Months passed. Her name appeared in newspapers, on TV, and across social media. Not for scandal, but for something the justice system hadn't seen in too long. Integrity. Judge humiliated, then made history. Monroe Mandate spreads across states. She didn't just judge a man, she judged a system. Letters poured in. Messages from mothers who'd stayed silent. Calls from former officers who'd given up, now asking to join the ranks of change. Law schools began teaching her case as a required milestone. But Celeste didn't go on talk shows. She didn't give speeches. She didn't chase the spotlight. She still showed up to court every day. She handled small civil cases, contract disputes, ordinary hearings where people needed justice as much as they needed air. For Celeste, true justice wasn't the loud moments. It was the quiet presence, day after day. One late afternoon, she visited a high school at the invitation of a young teacher. The classroom was silent as she entered, not out of fear, but out of respect. A shy student raised their hand and asked, "Do you still believe in the system? After everything?" Celeste smiled. "I don't believe in the old system, but I believe in the people sitting in this room asking that question. And I believe you are the new system." The class fell silent. Then they clapped, not loudly, but firmly, like the sound of a truth being acknowledged. Weeks later, a small ceremony took place in the old courtroom where history had been made. No reporters, no cameras, just court staff, the elderly janitor, the clerk, and a few former students. A plaque was mounted on the wall. Celeste Monroe Courtroom, where justice does not stay silent. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Everything had already been said, through the bare scalp she'd carried into that courtroom, through a voice that never wavered before corrupt power, through a life that refused to bow. That night, she sat on her porch. A light rain fell, and for the first time in years, Celeste Monroe felt peace. Her phone buzzed, a message from the student she'd met. "You're the reason I want to study law." Celeste stared at the screen for a moment, then replied, and you're the reason I keep doing this. There's no perfect ending for justice. But for Celeste Munro, justice began every day by refusing to stay silent. She didn't need to win to be called a hero. She only needed to stand and never bow. Celeste Munro was more than a judge. She was a reminder. Justice doesn't come from a high bench. It comes from a heart that rejects silence. If this story makes you believe change is real, even in small ways, share it. Because out there, someone is still waiting for someone to speak first. And if you're ready to join us in telling more stories of courage like this, don't forget to follow. Because justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It begins with you.